Si ti complazco esta not, seré tuya para siempre. Secreto de una joven Apache. Elders taught the girls to listen more than they spoke, to observe before they acted, and to respect traditions that had protected their people for generations. She accepted these lessons without question, believing that this was simply how the world worked. As she grew into adulthood, she became known for her calm nature. She was not the loudest in gatherings, nor the one who drew attention on purpose. Instead, people noticed her quiet strength. She helped her family, respected the elders, and followed the daily routines of the community. From the outside, her life looked settled and predictable. Inside, however, her thoughts were often restless. She wondered about the future, about love, and about whether a person could choose their own path without breaking the bonds of family and culture. In her world, relationships were not just about feelings. They were about responsibility, honor, and long-term commitment. Emotions were kept under control, especially for women. She understood this well and tried to follow it. Still, like any young woman, she carried hopes she rarely spoke aloud. She wanted to feel understood. She wanted her thoughts to matter. Most of all, she wanted to know what it felt like to be truly chosen, not because of duty, but because of the heart. The man entered her life quietly, without any dramatic moment. He was not a stranger, but someone she had seen many times before during gatherings and shared work. At first, he was just another face in the crowd. Over time, small moments began to stand out. A brief conversation while collecting water, a shared smile during a long day of work, a look that lasted a second longer than expected. None of it seemed dangerous at first. It felt natural, almost harmless. What drew her to him was not bold behavior or strong words. It was the way he listened. When she spoke, even briefly, he paid attention. He did not interrupt or laugh off her thoughts. In a community where her voice was often expected to remain soft and brief, this made a deep impression. Slowly, she began to feel seen in a way she never had before. This feeling confused her. She was not used to anyone looking at her as if her inner world mattered. She tried to push these thoughts away. She reminded herself of the rules she had grown up with. She told herself that emotions could be misleading and that attachment could bring trouble. Still, feelings have a way of growing when they are ignored. Each time she saw him, her heart reacted before her mind could stop it. She began to feel nervous, then guilty, then hopeful all at once. These emotions lived quietly inside her, hidden behind a calm face. The nights were the hardest. When the community settled into silence, her thoughts grew louder. She replayed conversations in her mind, wondering if she had said too much or too little. She questioned what his looks meant and whether she was imagining things that were not real. She feared the power of her own emotions, knowing that once spoken, words could not be taken back. Yet part of her wished for a moment of honesty, even if it scared her. One evening, circumstances placed them together away from others. There was nothing improper about it. They were simply in a quiet space where conversation felt easier. The air was calm and the day's work was done. Without the eyes of the community around them, the silence between them felt different. It was no longer empty, but heavy with unspoken thoughts. She felt her heart beating faster, her breath becoming shallow. They talked about simple things at first, daily tasks, family matters, ordinary topics that usually felt safe. But even these words carried a deeper meaning now. She sensed that he, too, was holding back something important. The longer the silence lasted, the harder it became for her to keep control. She felt as if she stood at the edge of a decision without fully understanding where it might lead. Inside her, two forces struggled. One was fear. Fear of being judged, misunderstood, or bound by something she was not ready to give. The other was longing. Longing to be honest, to express what she felt without hiding. She had never been taught how to balance these feelings. In her world, emotions were meant to be guided, not confessed freely. Yet that night, the weight of holding everything inside became too much. When she finally spoke, her words came out softly, almost as if she hoped they might disappear into the night. The question she asked was not planned. It rose from a mix of curiosity, insecurity, and hope. She did not fully understand the power of what she was saying. To her, it was a question shaped by emotion, not a formal promise. In her heart, she was seeking reassurance, not offering ownership of her future. The moment the words left her lips, she felt a change. The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer gentle. It was heavy and serious. She realized too late that her question could be understood in a way she had not intended. In a culture where words carried deep meaning, what she had said could be seen as more than emotional honesty. It could be taken as a commitment. She watched his expression shift. There was surprise, then something else, certainty. In that instant, fear washed over her. She wanted to explain, to take back the words or soften them, but she remained silent. Her upbringing had taught her that once spoken, words stood on their own. Explaining too much could make things worse. So she stayed quiet, hoping that time would clarify what she could not say. As they parted that night, her heart felt heavy. The path back to her home felt longer than usual. Every step echoed with the memory of her own voice. She replayed the question again and again, wishing she had chosen different words or waited for another moment. She did not sleep well. Her dreams were restless, filled with unclear images and a deep sense of unease. By morning, the world looked the same, but she felt changed. She moved through her daily routine, speaking when necessary and staying silent when possible. No one noticed anything unusual, yet she felt as if she carried a secret written across her face. She wondered what he was thinking, how he had understood her words, and what he might expect now. For the first time, she understood how a single moment could divide a life into before and after. She had not intended to make a promise, but she sensed that something had already shifted. The question she had asked, born from emotion and uncertainty, now stood between her and the future she thought she knew. And as the day passed, one truth became clear in her mind. Some words, once spoken, do not wait for permission to change everything. After that night, her days began to feel different, even though everything around her looked the same. The sun still rose over the land, people still followed their routines, and the community moved with its familiar rhythm. Yet inside her, something had shifted. She carried a quiet tension that never fully left her. Every task she did felt heavier, as if her thoughts were always one step behind her actions. She became more careful with her words. Each sentence felt risky now, as if any mistake could create another misunderstanding. She listened more than before, answered briefly, and avoided long conversations. People around her noticed that she seemed more distant, but no one asked questions. In her community, silence was often respected, and personal struggles were rarely discussed openly. Her thoughts returned again and again to that moment. She wondered how the man had interpreted her question. Had he seen it as a serious promise? Had he felt proud, hopeful, or confused? She wished she could step back in time and change the way she spoke. Not because she regretted her feelings, but because she feared the weight her words might now carry. When she saw him again, her heart tightened. Their eyes met briefly, and she noticed a new confidence in his expression. He greeted her politely, but there was something else beneath his calm voice. It felt as though he now stood closer to her than before, not physically, but in expectation. That frightened her. She realized that while her feelings had been uncertain, his understanding seemed clear and firm. She began to feel divided between two worlds. One was the life she had always known, guided by tradition and careful behavior. The other was this new emotional space, filled with questions and unclear boundaries. She did not know how to move between them without causing pain to herself or others. Each choice felt like it carried consequences she was not ready to face. At night, she struggled to sleep. Her thoughts would not slow down. She questioned herself constantly. Was she wrong to speak from her heart? Was she selfish for wanting clarity without commitment? She had been taught that responsibility mattered more than emotion, yet no one had taught her how to manage feelings when they arrived unexpectedly. She tried to convince herself that perhaps she was overthinking everything. Maybe the man would understand that her words were emotional, not binding. Maybe time would soften their meaning. She clung to this hope because it was easier than facing a direct conversation. Confrontation felt dangerous, especially when she did not fully understand her own feelings. As days passed, small changes became noticeable. The man began to show more attention toward her in public settings. Nothing improper, nothing obvious, but enough to make her uncomfortable. He offered help more often. He stood closer during conversations. Others began to notice this quiet connection, and that made her uneasy. In her community, attention often led to assumptions, and assumptions could shape reality. She felt trapped between speaking and staying silent. If she spoke, she risked disappointing him and possibly facing judgment. If she stayed silent, she feared being pulled further into a situation she did not fully choose. This inner struggle drained her energy. Even simple tasks began to feel exhausting. She thought about seeking advice from someone older, but fear stopped her. Explaining her situation would require admitting what she had said, and she was not ready to face the reactions that might follow. She respected her elders deeply, but she also knew that their advice would likely focus on duty rather than personal confusion. Her emotions became harder to hide. At times, she felt warmth and comfort when she thought about him. At other times, fear tightened her chest. She realized that feelings were not simple. They could bring joy and worry at the same time. This realization made her feel even more alone, because she had no words to explain it to anyone else. One afternoon, she noticed how easily rumors could begin. Two women glanced at her while whispering to each other. It might have meant nothing, but it was enough to make her anxious. She understood how quickly a story could form without her ever speaking again. This fear pushed her further into silence. She began to understand something important. By not speaking, she was still making a choice. Avoiding the truth did not protect her. It only delayed the moment when she would have to face it. This thought stayed with her, even though she did not yet know what to do with it. Her memories of childhood lessons returned to her mind. She remembered being told that strength was not only about endurance but also about honesty. At the time, she had not understood what that truly meant. Now, she started to see that honesty required courage, not just obedience. Still, courage did not come easily. Each time she prepared herself to speak to him, her confidence faded. She worried about hurting his feelings. She worried about being misunderstood again. Most of all, she worried about losing the respect of her community. These fears stood like walls around her thoughts. As the days continued, she felt the distance between who she was and who she was expected to be growing wider. She knew she could not remain in this state forever. Something would eventually force a change, whether she was ready or not. The question was whether that change would come from her own voice or from circumstances beyond her control. By the end of this period, one truth became clear to her. Emotions ignored do not disappear. They wait, grow stronger, and demand to be addressed. She had stepped into a situation with a single question, and now she was learning that questions, just like promises, can shape a life. She did not yet know how part 2 of her journey would end, but she felt certain that silence could not be her answer forever. As time moved forward, the quiet pressure inside her continued to grow. What had once felt like a single moment now stretched into many days filled with uncertainty. The secret she carried no longer felt small. It followed her everywhere, sitting beside her during work, standing close during gatherings, and returning with her each night. Even when she tried to focus on simple tasks, her thoughts slipped back to the same worries again and again. She noticed that her behavior had changed. She avoided places where she might meet him alone. She adjusted her routines, choosing longer paths or different times just to keep distance. At first, these changes felt like protection. Over time, they began to feel like a cage. She realized she was shaping her life around something she had never truly decided. The man, on the other hand, seemed to grow more certain. His actions suggested confidence, as if the path ahead was already clear to him. He spoke to her with familiarity now, not in words that crossed any line but in tone and presence. To others, it may have looked respectful. To her, it felt heavy. Each interaction reminded her of the meaning he had placed on her question. She struggled with guilt. Part of her felt responsible for his expectations. She blamed herself for speaking without fully understanding the weight of her words. Another part of her felt trapped by that same guilt, wondering why her single moment of honesty had taken control of her future. This inner conflict drained her strength and made her doubt her own judgment. The secret grew louder in her mind. She feared that if it stayed hidden much longer, it would begin to shape her life without her consent. She also feared that revealing it could bring judgment, misunderstanding, or shame. The balance between these fears left her frozen. She wanted guidance, yet felt unable to ask for it. During this time, she began to reflect deeply on what belonging truly meant. In her community, belonging often came from duty and shared responsibility. Yet she felt that true belonging should also include choice. She questioned whether a promise made in confusion could truly define a lifetime. These thoughts felt dangerous, but also freeing. One evening, she observed the elders speaking with younger members of the community. Their calm voices and steady presence reminded her of lessons she had once accepted without question. She realized that many of those lessons were meant to protect, not to silence. The idea slowly formed that honesty, when spoken with care, might bring clarity instead of harm. Still, fear held her back. She worried that speaking up now would appear dishonest, as if she were changing her story. She worried that others would see her as unreliable or weak. These thoughts weighed heavily on her, especially because she had always taken pride in being dependable and respectful. The man eventually sensed her distance. His expression shifted from confidence to confusion. This change affected her deeply. She did not want to cause pain, yet she knew that silence was already doing so. Each day that passed without honesty only made the situation more complicated. She began to understand that secrets do not stay hidden forever. They either find their way into the open or shape the lives of those who carry them. This realization frightened her, but it also gave her clarity. She knew that avoiding the truth was no longer an option. Her emotions became clearer during this time. She recognized that while she felt connection and respect for him, she did not feel ready for the future he seemed to imagine. This understanding brought sadness but also relief. For the first time, she knew what she truly felt, even if she did not yet know how to express it. She practiced conversations in her mind, imagining different outcomes. Some ended with understanding, others with disappointment. None of them felt easy. Still, she began to feel stronger with each imagined attempt. Naming her feelings, even privately, gave her a sense of control she had not felt before. The pressure of the secret slowly shifted into determination. She realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. This thought stayed with her, steady and firm, guiding her toward a future moment she knew was coming. By the end of this part of her journey, she stood at the edge of change. The secret that once felt unbearable now felt like a challenge she was preparing to face. She had not yet spoken the truth, but she was no longer running from it. For the first time since that night, she felt ready to take responsibility not just for her words, but for her own life. The days that followed brought a quiet but persistent shift in her thinking. She could no longer allow herself to live in the space between silence and honesty. Every time she went about her daily work, every time she helped her family or moved through the village, the weight of the secret pressed against her chest. It was a constant reminder that the moment she had spoken was not just a fleeting expression of feeling, it had consequences, and she was the only one who could decide how to face them. She began to understand that avoiding the truth was no longer protection, it was postponing the inevitable. The longer she stayed silent, the stronger the misunderstanding between her and the man became. Each day, she felt him watching her in subtle ways, not intrusive, but enough to make her aware that he expected something from her. This expectation, real or imagined, pressed against her mind and her heart. She realized that the time had come to act, to bring clarity, even if it meant discomfort or judgment. She reflected deeply on her own feelings. She knew now that her emotions were genuine, but they were not fully aligned with the future he seemed to imagine. She cared for him, yes, but she was not ready or willing to allow a single night of emotion to dictate the rest of her life. Her heart sought honesty, fairness, and freedom, the freedom to choose without fear. Coming to this understanding required courage, because it meant confronting not only him, but also the unspoken rules of her community and her own internal fears. In preparation for this conversation, she observed him carefully. She noticed how he treated others with respect, how he held himself, and how he reacted to the world. This observation was not meant to judge, but to understand the person he was and the expectations he might carry. She recognized that he, too, had his own fears, hopes, and misunderstandings. This realization gave her empathy and strengthened her resolve. She wanted to communicate her truth with care, ensuring that no one felt hurt unnecessarily. When the moment finally arrived, it was quiet and private. She found a space where they could speak without interruption, away from the gaze of the community. The air was still, carrying the faint scent of the evening, and the sky was turning the soft colors of sunset. She felt her heart beat faster, but she also felt a clarity she had not experienced in weeks. The preparation, the reflection, and the courage had built an inner strength that steadied her. She began by speaking about her feelings honestly. She explained that her question had been born from a mix of emotion and confusion, not from a desire to make a permanent promise. She told him that while she respected him deeply and cared for him, she needed the freedom to make her own choices without feeling bound by a single moment. Her voice was steady, though her heart raced, and she chose her words carefully, knowing that clarity and respect were more important than hurried speech. As she spoke, she observed his reactions closely. At first there was surprise, a flicker of disappointment, and then a thoughtful silence. She realized that he, too, had expectations that were being challenged. Yet she continued, speaking not to argue or convince, but to explain her truth clearly and sincerely. Her honesty was not an attack, it was an invitation to understanding. The conversation became a bridge between them. She explained her feelings, her fears, and her desire for clarity. He listened, sometimes nodding, sometimes pausing, as if absorbing a new perspective. She did not rush him, allowing space for his thoughts and reactions. By the time she finished, there was a quiet mutual understanding. The tension that had built over weeks began to ease, replaced by a sense of relief and honesty. After the conversation, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The secret that had haunted her was no longer hidden, and she had faced it directly. She understood that honesty did not always bring immediate comfort, but it brought clarity and respect. She also realized that courage was not simply about bold actions, but about being true to oneself even when it was difficult. In the days that followed, the dynamics between them shifted naturally. There was no awkwardness or bitterness, only a newfound respect and understanding. They interacted with care, aware of each other's feelings and boundaries. The man respected her choices and she respected his. Their connection continued, but it was now based on honesty rather than misunderstanding. The experience taught her a profound lesson about life, love, and communication. She learned that words carry power, that honesty requires courage, and that true respect comes from allowing others to choose freely. She understood that feelings must be acknowledged but not forced into promises they cannot sustain. This understanding strengthened her character and her confidence in navigating the complexities of life within her community. By the end of this chapter of her life, she felt a new sense of peace. She had confronted the secret, faced the consequences of her words, and established clarity in her relationships. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she now had the knowledge and courage to face them with honesty and self-respect. The past no longer held her captive. She was free to move forward, guided by her own heart and choices. And as she walked through the familiar paths of her village, helping with daily tasks and speaking with family and friends, she noticed a change within herself. There was a lightness to her steps, a quiet confidence in her actions, and a calmness in her thoughts. The journey had been difficult, but it had strengthened her in ways she could not have imagined. She knew now that facing the truth, no matter how challenging, was always the path to freedom and self-respect. The story of that night and the weeks that followed became a lesson she would carry forever. It was a lesson about courage, about honesty, and about the importance of understanding one's own heart. She realized that true freedom comes not from avoiding challenges or hiding emotions, but from facing them with clarity, respect, and unwavering honesty. In the quiet of the evening, when she sat by the fire or walked under the vast Apache sky, she reflected on the journey she had taken. She had faced fear, confusion, and expectation. She had confronted a secret that once seemed unbearable, and in the end, she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident in her ability to navigate life with integrity. This part of her story ended not with finality, but with understanding. She had learned that words once spoken could change a life. But she had also learned that the choices made after those words mattered even more. By facing her truth, she had reclaimed control of her life, her emotions, and her future. And in doing so, she had discovered the quiet strength that comes from living with honesty and respect for oneself and for others. Her life continued, but she walked forward differently now. She understood that while moments of doubt and fear might return, they could be faced with courage and clarity. The lessons she had learned would guide her through all future challenges. She had faced the secret, spoken the truth, and embraced the freedom that honesty brings. And with that freedom, she was ready to meet whatever the future held with strength, dignity, and self-respect. After the difficult conversations and the weeks of inner struggle, she felt a new sense of clarity. The moments of fear, confusion, and uncertainty had left her stronger than she ever imagined. Life continued in her Apache community, with the same routines, the same tasks, and the same expectations. Yet for her, everything had changed. She carried a quiet confidence that had not existed before, and each step she took felt guided by her own choices rather than by the weight of unspoken obligations or misunderstandings. She began to notice the beauty in everyday life in a deeper way. The early mornings when the sun painted the hills gold, the sound of birds in the trees, and the gentle movement of the wind across the land all seemed richer, more alive. Previously, her mind had been occupied with worry and the hidden weight of her secret. Now, freed from that burden, she could pay attention to small joys and simple details. This made her days feel lighter, even though responsibilities remained. Her interactions with others in the community became more genuine. Before, she had sometimes held back, careful not to reveal her inner thoughts or feelings. Now, she spoke with honesty while still respecting tradition and the feelings of others. People noticed a subtle change in her presence. She was still respectful and calm, but there was a new warmth and openness in her demeanor. Her friends and family responded positively, appreciating her clarity and the quiet strength she now carried. Her relationship with the man had also transformed. The tension and uncertainty that had once hovered between them were gone. They interacted with ease, not because they were formally promised to each other, but because there was mutual respect and understanding. She realized that relationships were not about possession or obligation, but about choice, care, and trust. This insight gave her freedom to connect with him without fear or confusion. She could enjoy his presence without feeling trapped by expectation. Life continued to present challenges, but she approached them differently. In the past, uncertainty had caused her to retreat, to overthink, or to remain silent. Now, she faced each problem with courage and self-respect. She understood that difficulties were part of life, but how she responded was entirely within her control. This perspective gave her strength in ways she had never known. She felt empowered, not because she controlled others, but because she had learned to trust herself. Her personal growth became evident in small decisions every day. When tasks needed completing, she approached them with a calm focus. When conflicts arose, she spoke honestly, balancing her feelings with respect for others. She no longer feared judgment or misunderstanding in the same way. Each choice, each careful word, reinforced the sense that she belonged to herself first. The community respected her more not because she changed the rules, but because she had learned to navigate them with integrity and maturity. She also spent time reflecting on the lessons she had learned from the secret that had once haunted her. She understood that words carry power, and that speaking without clarity can create confusion. She realized that honesty is not always easy, but it is essential for healthy relationships and self-respect. She learned that fear often comes from imagining worst-case scenarios, but courage comes from taking responsibility for one's own choices. These reflections became a guide for her future actions. As she grew more confident in herself, she noticed how much she had matured emotionally. The young woman who had once hesitated to speak, fearful of consequences, was now capable of expressing herself with both clarity and kindness. She recognized her own emotions, understood their complexity, and could communicate them without fear of being judged. This emotional maturity strengthened her connections with others, allowing her to navigate social situations with wisdom and compassion. She also discovered that freedom and love are not contradictory. She could care for the man and maintain a respectful, meaningful connection without giving up her independence or her right to make her own choices. This understanding relieved a great deal of inner tension. She realized that true affection and respect do not require possession or permanent promises. They require honesty, understanding, and mutual respect. She felt lighter, freer, and more at peace with her feelings than ever before. Her sense of belonging shifted as well. Previously, she had worried that her personal emotions might isolate her or make her different. Now, she understood that belonging does not mean giving up one's autonomy. She belonged to her community and to her family, but she also belonged to herself. This sense of balance brought calmness to her life. She no longer feared judgment as intensely because she knew her value was not solely determined by the approval of others. Daily life became more joyful. Tasks that had once felt routine now carried moments of satisfaction. Helping family, tending to the land, and participating in community events all felt richer. She noticed the smiles of friends, the laughter of children, and the quiet strength of the elders with a new awareness. Life, in its simplest forms, felt full of meaning. She no longer carried the secret that had weighed her down. In its place, she had self-respect, clarity, and emotional freedom. Her experience became a quiet source of wisdom. She began to help younger women in the community navigate their own feelings and decisions. She shared lessons about honesty, courage, and the importance of understanding one's own heart. Without revealing the details of her own story, she taught that clarity in communication, respect for oneself, and courage in facing emotions could prevent unnecessary pain. Her insight was subtle but deeply felt by those who observed her example. Over time, she came to see that life is not about avoiding challenges or uncertainty, but about meeting them with integrity. The secret that had once seemed unbearable became a turning point, a lesson that shaped her character, strengthened her resolve, and taught her the value of honesty. She realized that every person faces moments where decisions are difficult, where emotions are confusing, and where courage is needed. What matters is how one responds to those moments. She continued to grow, both personally and socially. Her inner strength allowed her to navigate complex situations without losing her sense of self. She maintained her dignity, balanced her emotions, and built relationships based on honesty and respect. Each day, she felt more in control of her life and more confident in her ability to make wise, thoughtful choices. The lessons she learned also gave her hope for the future. She understood that life would continue to present challenges, but she no longer feared them. She had faced a situation that had seemed overwhelming, and she had emerged stronger. This gave her confidence to face whatever came next, knowing that honesty, courage, and self-respect would guide her. As the seasons changed, she walked through her world with a sense of peace. She moved through her community with quiet confidence, embraced her relationships with clarity, and carried herself with dignity. The experience of the secret and the honesty it had required became a foundation for her life. She understood that true strength comes from within, and that freedom, respect, and love are most meaningful when guided by choice and truth. By the end of this chapter in her life, she had become someone who could face uncertainty with calm, navigate challenges with wisdom, and embrace relationships with honesty. The burden of the past no longer controlled her. Instead, it had shaped her into a stronger, wiser, and more self-aware woman. She had learned that life is not about promises made in fear, but about choices made with courage and clarity. Her story, while personal, became a quiet lesson for those around her. It showed that facing the truth, even when it is difficult, can bring freedom and peace. It demonstrated that respect, honesty, and self-awareness are powerful guides in life. And most importantly, it showed that one can belong to a community, care for others deeply, and still remain fully oneself. As she looked to the future, she felt ready to live with intention, to act with honesty, and to embrace life fully. She knew that challenges would come, but she also knew that she had the strength to meet them. She had faced her fears, spoken her truth, and emerged stronger. And with that strength, she was free to walk her path, guided by her heart, her values, and the lessons of her own courage. She carried forward not just the memory of what had happened, but the understanding of what it had taught her. That life is best lived with honesty, courage, and self-respect. That love is strongest when it is free and chosen, and that true belonging begins with knowing and honoring oneself. With this wisdom, she moved confidently into the future, fully aware of her own power and the freedom that comes from living authentically.